The Sikha we will be learning today is in the Sikh's Chelek Chav Dalet, the third Sikha to Parshas Vayelech. The Siyum Parshaseinu, the end of the Parsha of our Parsha, meaning Parshas Vayelech, where the Torah tells us, as Moshe Rabbeinu had angesagt the Levim, Neisar in Bris Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu commanded the Levim, those who carried the Oren, the Arein Bris Hashem, which means the Oren, the Holy Ark, which had the Luchas in it, and he said to them like this. First he said, Lakeach HaSefer HaTorah Zeh Gemer, take the Sefer Torah, etc., etc., and he told them certain things to do. And then he continued, in the same conversation, he continued to say, Hakilu alai, gather to me as kol ziknei shiftechem v'shetrechem, all the elders of your tribes and of your shetrim, the ones that, like the policemen, the ones that take care of making sure things are done properly, and I want to speak in their ears, the shir, etc., etc. And even though the pasuk says that he said together the elders of the shvatim and the shetrim, but as the Rabbi brings in order 3, really he meant all the Yidden. As it says in the end of the Seder, Kol Kahal Yisrael, all the Yidden. So Rashi quotes from the pasuk the words Hakilu alai, gather for me. And he's mefarish, and he explains like this. That day they didn't blow the trumpets to gather the community. Usually when they had to gather the community, the way they did it, as it says in Parshas Vayelech, it was by blowing a certain way the chatzaitzres. The Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu in the Parshas Vayelech, Aselecha, you should make to you chatzaitzres, make trumpets, and the trumpets will be used for certain things. One of the things was to gather the call. But this day, Rashi said that they did not use the trumpets to gather the people. Vishenamar, because it says, when it speaks about making the chatzaitzres, the trumpets, it says, Atzei lecho, Hashem said to Moshe, make to you. That means it's only made for Moshe. V'lehishlit Yeshua aleim, and he did not make Yeshua have control over it, the authority over the chatzaitzres. And even during the lifetime of Moshe Rabbeinu, not only Yeshua later didn't use it, but even in the lifetime of Moshe Rabbeinu, they were hidden before the day that he passed away. To fulfill this, fulfilled when it says, there is no control the day of your death. This is what Rashi says. The Pashtus land meant simply, we learn Pshat. Rashi, when he comes to comment, it is because there's something that's bothering him, the Pshat, that's not clear, and Rashi comes to explain it. So what's the problem Rashi has with this posik that Rashi comes to complain? So simply you learn that the Shaila in posik that Rashi comes to identify, the question that Rashi has in the posik that he's coming to answer is wie Rashi allein sagt. Actually, Rashi himself says, he doesn't say it with a lashon of a question, but from his lashon seems to be clear what he's trying to answer. Rashi starts off by saying, and they didn't blow that day with the trumpets to gather the call. So it seems like that this is what bothering Rashi. Why didn't they gather the people through the trumpets? Like it says in Parshas Vayelech, Shem said to Moshe, make to you 2 trumpets. And one of the reasons is to call the community. So why didn't they do it that day? That's what bothering Rashi. Now, who says they didn't? Maybe they did. It doesn't say in Chumash that they didn't do the chatzaitzes. It says to gather them. Maybe they gathered them with chatzaitzes. So the Rebbe explains what the hechret zu sagen, as Kilo made nit makel rein. And what forces Rashi to say that when it says gather, he didn't mean to gather them kemishpat hayidua, as it is normally known, haine b'chatzaitzes, which is the quote from the Maskil Adovi, who says that we know for sure that it wasn't done through chatzaitzes. So he says, because from them, how do we know that? From them was that Tzivui Shel Moshe Hakilu is given to the Levim. This commandment that they should gather the call, the community, was said to the Levim. That's why it starts off by saying, he spoke to the Levim, Neisarei B'S Hashem, and one of the things he said to them, gather the Yidden. So the Yidden, the Levim, were supposed to do that. Und die Tkiyas b'chatzaitzes, but you must sein dafke durch the Kohanim, and generally, when they gathered the people, normally with the chatzaitzes, it was done through the Kohanim. Like it says in Parshas Vayelech, that who should blow the chatzaitzes? Bnei Aaron HaKohanim, the Kohanim. So here, since it wasn't to the Kohanim, so it wasn't through the chatzaitzes. So maybe that's what bothering Rashi. Why didn't they blow the chatzaitzes? So Rashi comes to answer. He says that the reason they didn't blow, he says, because because it says Asay Lachon, Yeshua couldn't have control over it, etc., etc. Es ist aber nicht verstandig, not understood. Was Rashi sagt, levishenemar Asay Lachon, leish Yeshua aleim. Yeshua man shmei. Why does Rashi mention that Yeshua didn't use it? The whole question, according to what we said, was why didn't they blow the chatzaitzers? So the second half of Rashi would have answered the question because it was hidden. And the day before he passed away, the chatzaitzers were hidden, and because the pasuk is "Ein shilton b'yem hamavis." But the first part of Rashi, how does Yeshua come in? No one asked the question whether Yeshua should have done it or not. Rashi kommt doch verantworten, für was hat Moshe nicht makel gewinnt dem Kol der Chatzaitzers. Rashi is coming to answer why Moshe did not gather the people through the Chatzaitzers. Moshe gathered them and he didn't do Chatzaitzers. Why? But Rashi could have said, Rashi should have said simply, very short, V'lei toku. We should have said they didn't blow the day, that day, the Chatzaitzers. Lahakil esakol, to gather the people. Why? Because the Kayim Hashanemar, Ein Shilton B'yem HaMoves, to fulfill, because it says Ein Shilton B'yem HaMoves. So the Chatzaitzers were hidden on that day, so there were no Chatzaitzers. But Mela Moshe didn't know Chatzaitzes. But why does Rashi mention that it wasn't given to Yeshua? Yeshua had no control over the Chatzaitzes. Who's speaking about Yeshua here? Nochmal, the question is even stronger. The mocker from them Pirish Rashi is in Tanchume or Medrash Rabbi. The source of this Rashi is in the Medrash Tanchume and the Medrash Rabbi. Not here in Parshas Vayelech, but in Posek Aseilocho. In Baleischa, the Posek where it says, "Thank for you the Chatzaitzes." So there it says this idea about Negeya Yeshua. Aber dort wird Taka der Inje von Leishli Yeshua aleim nicht gebracht bei Negeya der Akola von Neisayim Shemes Meshe. There, this idea that Yeshua did not have a control over it is not brought concerning the gathering on this day that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, nor as an allgemein leinish. It says clearly there that Yeshua didn't use it. But the Posuk zogt asay lechot, Medrash says this lotion. The Posuk says make to you, meaning after mishtamish behem, you Moshe could use it, ve'einachem mishtamish behem, no one else should use it. Teidel lechot, the Medrash brings a raya, sharei Yeshua, talmid shemeshe leinish behem, kishebo lelochem b'yerichei. That Moshe, the Talmud of Yeshua, the Talmud of Moshe did not use it when you went to fight in Yerichai. So we're not even talking about that day. We're talking about B'chal Yeshua using it. Then, as a separate chidush, as a separate idea, is there Medrash Meit that says, Yeshua b'vad, and not only Yeshua couldn't use it, even Moshe Rabbeinu himself, as long as it got hidden before he even passed away. And it brings the Posek Ahilo Alai, when he said, at the day he passed away, he said, gather all the Eden. So the Medrash, where were the Chatzaitzes? Why didn't they use the Chatzaitzes? Ella, the Medrash says, Nikdasu. They were hidden. So not only Yeshua didn't use it, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't use it the last day either. Like it says, Ein Shilton B'yem HaMoves, there's no control on the day of a person dies. So in the Medrash, we have this idea about Yeshua, but nothing to do with the day of Moshe Rabbeinu gathering. It's a separate Inyan there. It's the more is not understood. Wie kommt es, how is it, as Dafke Rashi, welches Mafarish Pruta Shamikra, Dafke Rashi, who explains simple Pshat in the Posik. So Rashi is trying to explain Pshat in this Posik. So Rashi is all bringing the Arichas from Vishanemer. Rashi brings in the beginning that because it says Asay Lacho, and Lehishlit Yeshua Aleim, and Yeshua did not have any control, Bekesha to the Akola Shal the Meish Akilulai. In connection to Meish Rabbi the gathering, when he said Akilulai, I bring the Yidden to me, in connection to that, it says, and Yeshua didn't do it. Who's asking about Yeshua? So not only that's extra, if you look at the source from where Rashi takes it, it doesn't mention the Inyan on the day of Moshe Rabbeinu's passing, why Yeshua didn't use it. Because no one even had a question why Yeshua should have used it. So Rashi should have just said that the reason by Moshe it wasn't used together, they didn't use the Chatzaitzers, because on that day there were no Chatzaitzers, and Shilton B'yem HaMoves, whatever it is. Then the Rebbe said, Mefarshim explain as Ima Yeshua Shelek man. He said like this: if Yeshua would have control over the Chatzaitzres, Achrei Moshe after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, they would have blown that day that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. In other words, there would have been a possibility to think that Yeshua should blow. In other words, if it would be true that Yeshua had a right over to use it, so on the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, before the day he passed away, Yeshua could use it. So whatever Enochanama Mesha couldn't use it, but Yeshua could use it. The Mele, Rasha comes to tell you why Taka didn't Yeshua use it, because Yeshua had no control over it. But das verantwortet in the Rebbe, it doesn't answer Loshen Rasha, doesn't answer the way Rasha writes it, the sign, the style of the way Rasha writes it. But Rasha had gedacht, the first thing Rasha should have done, which is the real question on the posik, why did it not use the Chatzaises the day that Moshe gathered the Eden? And the answer would have been, it's not ein shilton b'yamamovas, because on the day of your death, you don't have control, so you didn't have control of the Chatzaises. That should be the first thing Rasha should have written. On the noch meisav zayin, then Rasha would add, those was the one that you need Gnus HaKabon Tzad Yeshua. But why didn't Yeshua use it? Moshe couldn't use it. Why didn't Yeshua use it? And the answer would be, is Vayelech Yeshua Leib. Yeshua had no right over the Chatzaises. Yeshua couldn't use the Chatzaises at all. So that would be an additional thing, in addition to what Rasha would write to answer the question. The question is, why didn't Moshe use it? Because he couldn't use it. Then you could say, but in that case, why didn't Yeshua use it? I would answer that, but that's a second thing. Aber nicht ohne mit Ninja von der Fischnammer, Yeshua Leib. But not the way Rasha does it. Rasha starts off by saying they didn't blow because Yeshua couldn't use it. The question was not, why didn't Yeshua use it? The question is why Moshe didn't use it. And that should have been answered because Moshe couldn't use it that day. And then you say Yeshua, so that would be a second thing. But Rasha does it as a first. He starts off by saying that Yeshua couldn't use it because he has no right over it. As if the question was about Yeshua. The question is not about Yeshua. There are also many Yukin questions in the Loshen of Rasha. Amongst them, in other words, there are more questions, and the Rebbe is going to ask only some of the questions. Number one, we pass the Loshen Shlita. How does the word Shlita? Rasha uses the Loshen V'lei Hishlit Yeshua Leib. He didn't give Yeshua the Shlita. What's Yeshua? What does the word Shlita mean? Shlita means control. How does that fit when they gave the Chatzaitzes concerning the trumpets? Rasha had gedarf zogen al derech Loshen HaMedrash. Now Rasha should have said, like the Medrash said, as we quoted before, V'lei Nishtamish Bem Yeshua. Yeshua didn't use it. Ukayetz or something similar. Not control, not rulership, authority, or whatever, however it's going to translate it. Befrat as the comment gives so is, especially that in the psukim in Baleischo, which the posuk asay lecha you should do, and the posuk is trying to tell you nobody else. Rasha himself uses the loshen, according to some girsas. Ato eisa, you make it, umishtamish ben, and you use it. V'leach, no one else should use it. So there, the loshen is use it. So how come here says Yeshua didn't have control or authority or rights, whatever, over it? Should have said Yeshua couldn't use it. Second question. Rasha is Rasha maitik in them dibra maskal navort a lie. Why does Rasha quote from the posuk when the posuk says, he says hakilu a lie? We have the klal, as the Rebbe says always, that Rasha quotes from the posuk only those words which are negaya to his pirush, or it's negaya to the kasha that he's asking, or negaya to the teretz he's asking. Here, the word Elai is not important. Hakilu Elai is gathered to me. Rasha is achnor mafarish l'chura. It seems that Rasha only explains the word hakilu, the word gather. As the Reif Nakol is given the Chatzaitzes. Rasha is trying to explain that it was not through the trump, etc. So we're trying to just explain how was the hakilu, how was the gathering. The word Elai is not negay here to me and not to me. That's not what Rasha is trying to say. So why does Rasha quote those words from the pasuk? Is there beer in Bezet? The Rebbe said Pshat is like this. So Bahagdim first bring again says Yedu as Aderech Harogel is Darkesh Rasha Pirush Al Teir Al Hashas. Generally, the way of Rasha, the style, so to speak, of Rasha, when he's in his commentary, the Torah, and the truth is the same thing on the Gemara also, needs some not to explain the question he's trying to answer. In other words, Taisvis a lot of times starts with V'im Taimar Avakasha V'yashleimer V'ateres. Rasha also comes to explain, even Gemara also, and Chumash Avada comes to explain something that's not understood. But Rasha doesn't usually ask. Nor a Zog Gleich than Pirish and Posik. He right away starts with a pshat, and automatically, when you see what he writes, you understand that there's a question or a few questions are answered. Nochmer goes in further. In viel Erte, wo hebt uns ein Pirish mit der Shaila, many times when Rasha starts his comment with a question, is es nicht der Fall, wo dosi die Shaila ikris and posek welcher kommt verantworten. It's not because that's the main question Rasha has in the posek that he's coming to answer. Nor as von dem Teretz of der Shaila, but bedeutig mal verantwortet die Shaila ikris in posek welcher Rasha is nicht mehr faret. Sometimes Rasha does start with a question. But many times, that's not the main question Rashi is going to answer. Rashi has a different question. But in order to answer that other question, he starts off, there's another question we have, and that Pshat, because of the other question, answers also the real question that he has. But Rashi does not do it. And in the order 37, the Rebbe even says that many times we find that Rashi starts off with a contradiction between two psukim. This pasuk it says like this, another pasuk is different. The Rashi tries to answer. Now, sometimes the contradiction is that a previous pasuk it says one way, and this pasuk it says another way. So that makes sense because we already know what we learned. But sometimes Rashi asks, the kasha is that how could pasuk say like this when later there's a pasuk the opposite, and that seems to contradict the way the Rebbe learns Pshat and Rashi, that Rashi would not ask a question about something that's later, because the ones that learn Rashi only know, because Rashi is made for people who only learned Rashi, they're only learning Chumash. So they know what Rashi already said, what the Pasuk said, but they don't know yet what the Pasuk says later. And therefore, if there's a contradiction between two Psukim, Rashi will ask the kasha in the second Pasuk, because we already know what it said before, and now it says a Pasuk which contradicts, so Rashi answers. But sometimes he does the other way. Why does he do it? Why doesn't Rashi wait till you get to the second Pasuk and then he'll ask the question? So the Rebbe answers, because in those places, the kasha that Rashi has, the contradiction, is not the kasha Rashi has on the main kasha he has on the pasuk. He has another kasha. To answer that other kasha, he says we have a contradiction, and Rashi tells us what it says in the other pasuk, and there's a contradiction, and that answers this kasha. So we see that a lot of times Rashi writes a question, but the question is not the main question that he has in the pasuk. The Rebbe says the same thing here. Das, was Rashi hebt uns ein Pirish mit Belitoka, Isaim Bechatzeis, is this that Rashi starts off his commentary on this posik, that they didn't blow that day with the trumpets, which we learned till now. That was the question. The question Rashi starts off, why did they not blow the Chatzaisis together? Didn't like they did always. It does need the Shailikis and posik. That's not the main question. The contrary, it's really not a question. Kama Pashtonim, many Meforshim, like he says, the Benezer, the Cheskuni, the Ramban, etc. Lernen as mit Vayitzav Meishes Alvim Lokeich HaSefer HaTeira Hazeh Werden Gemeinde Kehanim. The reason we said before that Rashi knows that it wasn't through the Chatzaises, because the Chatzaises were blown usually through the Kehanim, and here he said to the Leviim. Some of Forshim learn, and you could learn similarly like that in Pshat, that here Takat also meant the Kehanim. The Estate Frier, it says before, Vayitna the Sefer Teira, he gave the Sefer Teira la Kehanim b'nei Levi. He calls them b'nei Levi, and it was the Kehanim. So you could say here Taka the Kehanim. So according to simple Pshat, you could learn that the Taka means that they gathered, and doesn't say how, like you always gathered through the Chatzaitzes. So it's not even such a big kasha. Why didn't they use the Chatzaitzes? Maybe they did use. So that's not really Rashi's kasha. The Rashi is the Uisim Biker Rashai Leklolis in debate the Verter Akilo like it will come. Rashi is bothered by a question on these two words. Hakilo Elai, gathered to me. That has a problem. And he'll explain the problem later. When the Shailon answered in order to answer this question, is Rashi Rashi explains as the Hakilo do is given and an Eifum Fum Veletoka Isi Bachatzeitz Lakalosako. To answer the question, which is in the words Hakilo Elai, he starts off to answer it by saying that they did not look below the Chatzaitzres that day to gather the people. And by explaining why he didn't gather the Eden that day with the trumpets, so the general question, which we're going to say later, gets answered. What is that question that we have? The question in these words, Hakilu Elai, that Rashi is coming to answer is so. What's the question? Right in the beginning of the Seder, Rashi already explained on the pasuk where it says Rabbi, and he said, I cannot anymore go out and come in. That means Le'yuchal, I can't, means Ein Rashoyi. Not I can't, but I'm not allowed to. The permission, the right was taken away from me. The Nitna Yeshua was given to Yeshua. In other words, Moshe already said before that today Yeshua took over. He's there, he's the leader now. In a few psukim later, Rashi gives a rule. There's only one leader. Daber means a leader. One leader to the generation, not two leaders you don't have. Yeshua became, since Moshe Rabbeinu said already, it was taken away from me, given to Yeshua. Now Yeshua is the leader of the Eden. Is Moksha, so we have a kasha. The Kumtas as the Akola von Eden is given durch Moshe. Why is it that the gathering of the Yidden then was through Moshe? It should have been through Yeshua. He became the leader. Emes taka true as Moshe Rabbeinu gewollt allein reden zu Yidden. True, Moshe Rabbeinu himself wanted to speak to the Yidden, like the pasuk says, I want to get witnesses of Shemayim v'oretz and heaven and earth, etc., etc. So Moshe wanted to speak to them. But the Smakil sein, them call, but together the community, which means this shows leadership, to give a speech, so to speak, and tell them things. You don't have to be the only leader. Doesn't have to be, could be somebody, could be some other great person. But to gather is the one that has the control, has the right. So to gather the call, that belongs to the Nosi, to the leader of the generation. Yeshua became the daber of the door, and it could be only one. He should have gathered them, and then Moshe would speak to them. He would get, as the leader, he gathers them together. Moshe could speak to them. At best, should have been through both together. As when after they gathered, they spoke, they both spoke. It says in Pasuk, who Yeshua Banun. Moshe and Yeshua spoke to the Eden. So here at least should have been through both, but Yeshua also. Moshe said, gathered to me. That Eli, Moshe Zoktekila, to me, which is Moshe, he is the one that's saying, gather. Was his Shayla of Yeshua, which comes to exclude Yeshua, only to me. And that's the question Rasha has. Why would Moshe be the one to gather the Eden if Yeshua was already the leader? In order to answer this question, that's the real question Rasha has. Is Rasha Magdim? Rasha starts off by saying, that they did not use the Chatzaitzres. Und is gleich mal Vayelech gates Yeshua, and he says they didn't use it, and he says why Yeshua didn't use it, because the whole question is why. The whole question is why wasn't Yeshua the leader here to do this? So right away he started. They didn't use the trumpets, and he explains concerning Yeshua. Because the pasuk said, the Eibush said to Moshe, "Make to you when is Rabbi Medayek," and Rashi explains and his Medayek for the Hishlek Yeshua Aleim. He didn't give Yeshua the control over it. In other words, Yeshua couldn't use it because he didn't have the control. Was dosas lahishli Yeshua leim. This that Yeshua did not get the control is mevura b'derech melech for was the akol is g'mendrich Moshe. This explains automatically, like we say later, why the gathering went through Moshe, not through him. And the whole point is here the shlita. The Rebbe asked these two shaylas. Why Rasha brings the word hakil, a lie? And the question is, why is negate the word a lie to me? And the question is, so now we have the reason why Rasha quotes a lie, because that's the question. Why to me? Why is Moshe Rabbeinu saying gather? And he's the one that says gather to me, which means he's gathering. And that another question was, why does he use the word shlita? Because here it's Negeya who has the leadership, so to speak. And leadership is shlita. And using this chatzaitzes is connected to the rulership that you have. And maybe you load the chatzaitzes. Kittelakam, and the Rebbe will explain. And this is the pshat. In the minyan for Nasei L'chov Alei Hishlik Yeshua Aleim is l'churin understanding this concept that he said Nasei L'chov make to you, and he did not give Yeshua the control is l'churin not understood. The diuk Nasei L'chov, when we say Moshe, the Eibush said to Moshe, make to you means Ato Eisa Mishtamish Rebbe. You make it and you use it. Nobody else should use it. So why didn't Yeshua use it? Because the Eibush said only you and no one else. When he says nobody else, would seem to be nobody else that's a simple person, stam a person. We're talking about Yeshua, that Eibush appointed him as a leader on the community that will go out. He will take over. He will become the manik for Eden, the leader of Eden. Reya for Nadas Hashem. He will be the shepherd of the community of Hashem. As taking over from Moshe Rabbeinu. Why shouldn't the trumpets go over to him? Why would it, by saying give it to Moshe and no one else, also exclude Yeshua? If that he also can't use it, why would it be? It for Yeshua should be able to. Since the control, which means the leadership came over from Moshe to Yeshua. So the trumpets, which were negated to Moshe, but only made for Moshe, should automatically go over to Yeshua. But nevertheless, we say no. It did not go over to Yeshua. That's what Rasha says. I say l'chonat Yeshua. So the Funge Gufa gedrungen, that itself, the fact that Yeshua could not use the Chatzaitzres proves as nit all in Yonah Meisha Zayin Ribet to Yeshua. As much as we said it went over to Yeshua, not everything went over to Yeshua. But Meisha Shlita of Eden is given a hecher of Yeshua's. Meisha's control over Eden was higher than Yeshua. And we see that from before. That if Rashi Rashi already said before, and we have the rule that whatever Rashi said before, the one that's learning the Rashi now really remembers. Rashi hoped that everyone remembers what he said before. So Rashi already wrote before that the face of Mesha was like the sun, the face of Yeshua was like the moon, which means Yeshua was in a lower level. So Mele, Yeshua took over as much as he could take over. But obviously, since Mesha was higher, there was something that Mesha had that Yeshua didn't get. That stayed with Mesha. This is what Rashi means when he says he didn't give the control to Yeshua over the Chatzoisres. Yeshua, he didn't have the control. In other words, as much as Yeshua had control over the Klal Yisrael, but you see here that in one aspect he didn't. Well, need their ganze Inyan Ashlita for Moshe according to Yeshua, because not the complete rulership of Moshe was given over to Yeshua. So when we see the fact that Yeshua could not use it, even though he took over from Moshe, which we would think he should be able to use it like Moshe did, shows that not in every aspect did the Shlita go over to Yeshua. And that's what Rasha starts off by saying. The question Rasha has is, why didn't Yeshua call the Eden? Why did Moshe call? Yeshua became the leader. So Rasha starts off by answering. You see, he didn't use the Chatzaitzres. Yeshua didn't. Question was, why mention Yeshua? Sure, you mention Yeshua. The whole tenet starts off by, you see, Yeshua didn't use the Chatzaitzres. That proves that not the whole control came over to Yeshua. So from that we understand, as Kol's man Moshe Rabbeinu had gelebt, as long as Moshe lived, even after Moshe Rabbeinu said, the Reshus, the control was taken from me. The Nitl Yeshua was given to Yeshua. It wouldn't be right that Yeshua should be the one to gather all the Eden in front of Moshe. Since certain things did not go over to Yeshua, as we see concerning the Chatzaitzres. But since they is nor Moshe given the einzige Shalit, there are certain things that Moshe Rabbeinu remained the only one. So therefore, when it comes to gathering the Eden, Moshe still had the right to do that. But where do we take it from? Where do we see that not everything went over? See, the answer of Rashi is, why didn't Yeshua gather the Eden? Moshe answer is because the real answer, and the point of the answer is that Yeshua did not take over in everything, but Mela, there's still left that Moshe Rabbeinu should gather the Eden. Where do we see this from? That Yeshua did not take over in everything? So Rashi starts off by saying, you see, the Chatzaitzres he didn't use. So obviously their control did not go over completely. The Mela is answered why Yeshua didn't do it, because and Moshe was the one, Yeshua couldn't do it. And Moshe did it because Moshe still remained in a certain aspect the leader, and he was the one to do it. But where do we see it from? From the fact that Yeshua didn't use the Chatzaitzres. So Rashi starts off by saying why Yeshua didn't use the Chatzaitzres, to prove that there is still something that Moshe had over Yeshua. After Rashi answers the main question, and in the gathering itself, and why why gathered to me? The first thing that bothered Rashi, as we said, is why Moshe Rabbeinu did it. So Rashi answered it, Moshe Rabbeinu did it because he's still the boss. On top, in a certain aspect, he's the boss. And that's what Rashi says, as you see from the fact that Yeshua couldn't use the Chatzaitzres. Then after that is a Rashi mefarish dem prat or eifum von Akilu. Was Moshe hat sich nicht benutzt mit Chatzaitzres. Then Rashi answers another. After we know that Yeshua couldn't do it, and Moshe did it. Okay, now comes another question. Okay, so Moshe was the one that had the right to gather the Eden. But the question is another question. Why didn't Moshe use the Chatzaitzres? If Moshe had the right, fine, and Moshe had the right to use the Chatzaitzres, and he usually gathered the Eden with the Chatzaitzres, why didn't he do it here? And that comes Rashi to answer that next question. Then Rashi comes and answers, you know why Moshe didn't use the Chatzaitzres? And even in his lifetime, before he died, it was hidden, and he couldn't use it. Like it says, there's no control in the day of Movis. The day that he died, he couldn't control either. So Moshe could use it. So the first question is, why didn't Yeshua gather the Eden? The answer is because Moshe was still the boss, as we see from the fact that Yeshua not, because there's certain things that he couldn't do. He didn't have the shlita, and that's why I use the word shlita, because we're talking here about the control, the balabatishkai, the hanhoge, the leadership. And then, so Moshe had to, we know that Moshe was the one to do it. Why didn't Moshe use the Chatzitzis? Rashi asked, because the last day, Ein Shilton B'Yam, so he didn't have the full control of everything, and therefore he couldn't use the Chatzitzis. In the Pirish Rashi, from the wine of Torah, as we call it, which is the Chassidus that we have in this Rashi, is like this. The Chura is not verstanden, the Chura is not understood. True that you couldn't gather Eden with the trumpets, because blowing the trumpets, the one that's in control of blowing the trumpets, shows control. And Moshe Rabbeinu, on the last day of his life, the day he passed away, ain't shilton, so he didn't have control, so he couldn't use the Chatzitzis. Why was there another change? As the Kehanim Zlmakas I need, he says, Geton geborn to the Leviim. And instead of the Kehanim, like they always gathered the Eden, done to the Leviim. Always was done to the Kehanim with the trumpet. So the trumpets they couldn't use. But why couldn't this case also the Kehanim do it? Why did the Leviim have to do it? Like das Verstehen will understand is by looking into the deeper pshat, what does it mean there is no control on the day of your death? First glance, how is it that the day that Moshe passed away, he should have a descent lower in his level? He loses control. There's something that goes down in level. By tzaddikim it goes the other way. They always go from spring to spring, higher and higher. As they get elevated from day to day. Certainly the last day of life on this world. Certainly, Moshe Rabbeinu on that day was in the highest level. Certainly, according to what we know, at the aim is so that the Greich Epim Sharanun from the Chamishim Sharabina Shnitn Beilam. Bis dem Tog is Nitn Lamesha Chaserecha Sharanun. It says like this: the Chazal tell us that there are 50 gates of wisdom given to the world. Moshe Rabbeinu reached 49. He was missing the last one. That's what it says. It says 49 were given to Moshe, and he was missing the 5th. Then we know the pshat. And the Rebbe brings it here from the Shalom, from the Torah, and then the Mizricha Magid. And on the last day of his life, he reached El Sharanun, the 50th gate. But it says he only had 49, missing one, was still the last day. But the last day, he reached that level, and even touches. It says Moshe Rabbeinu was buried Han Nevei, the mountain of Nevei. Nevei is made up of 2 words, Nun, Bei. Nun is 50. He got the 50th. So we know that Moshe Rabbeinu reached a very high level, much higher than before on the day of his passing. So how is that on the day of his passing? Ain't shil. It's a yerida, it's a descent. Shleimer the beer in them, so everything say the pshat is like this. Ados was ain't shil to me amavis. This that at the day of death, there's no control, is by tzaddikim, By others we don't know. Could be talking, they get lower. By tzaddikim comes mitzad der meile for Yemamisa. Not as a chasor in the Yemamisa, you go lower. Because there's something special that day. As down statement hecher von Inyan HaShilton. That day you're in a higher level than being in control of. Because Shlita Weiss, when you say you're in control, shows you have a connection to those that you control over. A king is like it says by Shol HaMelech, that he was from his shoulder up higher than everybody, which besides the Gashmas, the Kipshat, that means he was very tall, but that big Mila, that's not so special. It has a different Pshat. It says in Chassidus, that means, Afilas Shechem, even his shoulder is Geveya Mikalom, is higher than others. In other words, the shoulder is not the highest part of the person. And all people reach to his shoulder. That means his shoulder was higher than other people's heads. Head is the highest level. And he was so high that even his shoulder, which is not his highest part, is higher than them. Certainly, the king's head is higher than everybody else. That means he's elevated. Aber von deswegen, is elevated, tak is much higher, but his berech is still in connection to the people, he's higher than them. When in them that's how you're able to control them, why you're considered control over them, because you are higher than them, but you are connected. But if you wouldn't have any connection to them, you can't be called you control them. There's no connection between the two. So by always when in this lifetime, as great as you are, you still have a connection to them. You're higher than them, a connection. But by the tzaddikim on the day that you die, you get elevated so high that you're completely beyond the nation. You're not connected to be considered control, ruler over the people. That's the pshat ein shilton b'yem hamoves by tzaddikim, like by Moshe Rabbeinu. That the day you're so elevated, so high that we can't even call you that you're ruling over them or controlling them because you're completely beyond. So we could think, according to that, the Wald Moshe Rabbeinu is alle geworden, Adar geworden is in ganzen Hecher von Shlita Alam Yisrael. Since Moshe Rabbeinu is elevated to such a level that he is completely beyond having the control, the rulership over the Yidden. Nitoch Chas v'Sholem kein kesher, kein shayches v'kesher tzis Moshe and Yisrael. So Chas v'Sholem, there's no connection anymore between Moshe and the Yidden. So the Apostle tells us, I feel it in Moshe Rabbeinu steht in der Darge. Even when Moshe Rabbeinu is in that level, via his b'yei Meisei, in the day of his death, he's in that high level. Zok Moshe Hakilu Alai. Moshe says on that day he didn't use the trumpets because Ein Shilton was very high, but he says, "Gather to me." To Moshe. Weil Eden seine Beetzem ein Sach mit dem Etzem von Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Eden, no matter how high Moshe Rabbeinu is, the essence of Eden is connected, is one thing with the essence of Moshe Rabbeinu. But Loshe Rashi, like Rashi says in Parsha Chukas, Moshe hu Yisrael, Yisrael hu Moshe. Moshe is the Eden, and the Eden are Moshe. And das ist der Tam Nimi, was der Akole gewinnt b'li Chatzaitzes. This is the deeper reason, the inner reason why the gathering was not through the Chatzaitzes, through the trumpets. Akole b'Chatzaitzes weiß, das ist verbunden mit die Give Tirche. If you gathered Eden through blowing Chatzaitzes, means you got to do something. You got to get involved. You got to work. You got to blow trumpets and bring them to Moshe. Gather all the Eden. Aber in der Akole von Eden to Moshe, wie steht bei Moshe, but when you gather the Eden to Moshe on the day that he passed away, then the Svet Nisgalas and Etzem passing away means that's when the Etzem Moshe lived the highest level, and he reached that there is the revelation of his essence. Vet Nisgala the Atzmis the Keshaychas to Eden to Moshe. Nisgala Vet Nisgala the Atzmis the Keshaychas von Eden to Moshe. Nisgala umpaled that the essential connection that Eden have to Moshe Vet Nisgala. It's almost like saying that you don't have to do anything to have them gather to Eden. It doesn't mean that Lepel they gather without calling them. You have to call them begashmias. But when they're coming is not something that you have to take something separate and you're bringing them. Trumpet shows you calling them, you're telling them, no, you got to come. Here, this is an essential thing. Now, probably he told him, I don't know exactly how it worked. But the idea, the concept here is that, that by not having chatzet, there was no special thing that you had to do to bring them. They were pulled to Moshe Rabbeinu. Because when the Moshe Rabbeinu is etzem in his gala and the etzem of Yid is Moshe, so they're one thing, so they come automatically. When the Chazal sagen, similar to what the Chazal tell us, aber jeden Niden is jede Milse Sutra sehi, the far was like Abba Moshe Milse Sutra sehi. The Gemara, the Pasuk says like this, Hashem said to Moshe, Ma Hashem alakecha she'il mim, what does Hashem ask and give you kim liras Hashem? Nothing but have fear of Hashem. So the Gemara asks, it makes it sound like it's a small thing. To have Yiras Hashem, have fear of Hashem, something small. And the Gemara answers, yes, Legaba Moshe, Milsa Zutrasi, Legaba Moshe, and it's not a small thing. But the Alter Rebbe does Mavai, the Alter Rebbe explains, he asks the Kasha. If David would be talking only to Moshe, it's a good answer. For Moshe, it's a small thing, but he was telling it to the Yidden also. So how could you say Legaba Moshe, it's a small thing? What about the other Yidden? So Alter Rebbe explains that every Yid has in himself a pchina, something of Moshe Rabbeinu. Even though not everybody feels the Moshe Rabbeinu that's within him. Since Moshe is the Yidden are Moshe, pale the pchinas Moshe, eif und in jeder Yidden b'derech HaMelech. As it automatically pales, whether you know about it or not. It has a hashpah on you that Yireh becomes a small thing to you because you have Moshe. Same thing here. This connection of Moshe, of Yidden to the Moshe, the day that he passed away, when the Etzem in his gala, yes, there was an essential connection between Yidden and Moshe Rabbeinu. The day that he became very high. So on one hand, you might think the day he became very high, he's separated from Yidden. He's over. Not even Shlita, and he can't say the word Shlita because he's beyond. But in truth, so that's why he couldn't use the Chatzetzes. But in truth, the pulling to Moshe, the connection to Moshe, didn't need Chatzetzes. It was like an essential connection. Now comes the Rabbi. This will answer the question we started in the initial Torah. Why the Leviim did it? Question was, Mela the Chatzaitzes ain't Shilton of Yemamovis, but why did they not blow Chatzaitze? Why didn't they blow trumpets together? Now we understand. The Chiluk zwischen Kohen and Levim is that this is basic Chassidus and Kabbalah. The difference in levels of Kohen and Levim is it says like this. And he quotes from the Zayar and the Kutatayra and different places. Kohanim are B'chinas Chesed. It says Kohen is a level of Chesed. Like it says in the Posik, that Tumecha B'yorecha, the Ish Chasidecha, Urim v'Tumim, which was by the Kohen Gadol, by the Kohen, is Leish Chasidecha. Kohen is called Isha Chesed. Kohen represents Chesed. And Chesed, we know, is Amshochem Elmayla Lamata. It's coming down. Chesed is when you give Chesed to somebody. You're doing kindness, means you're giving. Somebody who has more, gives it to somebody who has less. Somebody smarter, explains to somebody who's not so smart. So it's always the Amshochem, bringing down from higher to lower. Levim Zainem B'chinas Gvura. Halom Amata Lamayla. Levim, it says, the level of Gvura. It says in different Maimorim, different Chassidus, that Levim, not the Kabbalah, but Chassidus, Levim at the level of Gvura. Now, Gvura is called Aloma Matal Amayla. Gvura is like difference in water and fire. Water comes down, and water is Chesed. Fire is Gvura, fire always goes up. So Gvura represents going up. That's the level of the Levim. That's why it says the Levim used to sing in the Beis Hamikdash. That's the end of going up. Whatever, not to go into it, but that's what it says in Chassidus. When the Rebbe, therefore, the Tzemakel and Eden, they lie. When they had to gather Yidden alive, Moshe says to me, which means not just to Moshe. To Moshe via state in Allah, but to Moshe Rabbeinu, as he's so high on the day when he passed away, Hecher from Shilton, when he's beyond Shilton, Shilton shows that you're still connected. Here, when he's so high, and you want to bring the Yidden to connect to him when he's so high away, he says during the Levim. That had to come to Levim, but Stunu by Yidden. They are the ones that have the koyach to bring, because since the Levim's Aveda is Gvura, and the Aveda of Halom Mata going up, so when you had to bring the Yidden up to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, that had to go through the Levim.